Hi, everybody. It's great to be back here. I haven't been since COVID started. I did my first book signing here in 1988, so that was good. That's a good memory. I did sort of a double introduction, so both poets, a little bit like a paper you'd write in school, maybe. It's a pleasure to introduce these two fabulous poets. Reading their new books together, I was struck not only by how good they both are and by their distinct styles, voices, and sensibilities, but also, despite these differences, by a certain commonality in their concerns that might at first not be readily apparent. In Casualty Reports, Martha Collins writes about, among other things, coal mining, its history as well as its environmental impact, gun violence, racism, and war. Anna V.Q. Ross's Flutter Kick is to a large extent about, as she put it at her recent Blacksmith House reading, family and origins, including domestic scenes tinged with both joy and fear of potential or actual trauma or loss. But it would be far too simplistic to say that Collins is the poet of social and political issues and of history, and Ross the poet of daily life and personal history, or that Collins is the poet of news from the world at large, while Ross is the poet of what she calls in one poem, the breaking news of myself. Some of the coal miners that Collins writes about are her own relatives and ancestors. The first poem in the book begins, "My father's father's father." So this book, like Ross's, is also in its own way about family and origins. In one poem, Collins uses the phrase, "Can I imagine myself in reference to the scene where a police shooting occurred. It is her attempt to imagine herself in such scenes and sometimes to implicate herself that grounds these poems in the personal and makes them more powerful. And the elegies in the last section of the book are truly intimate. As for Ross, the sense of impending menace in some of her family poems is often the result of direct, indirect, or imagined intrusions from the outside world or the news. That is, from the very things that Collins so often takes as her subjects, including gun violence, war, and assault. In one poem, the speaker can't keep herself from imagining a shooter breaking into her children's school. In another, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's testimony at the Kavanaugh hearings on the radio keeps breaking in while the speaker drives her daughter home from dance class. There are many other examples, and there are also poems in which Ross, like Collins, addresses a tragic event head on, like the powerful poem, "The Crossing," about the drowning of 13 women in a boat disaster off the coast of Italy. Both of these poets possess an expansiveness of vision that encompasses both the world at large and the world at hand, a kind of double awareness of what is going on in the here and now of their lives and what is going on elsewhere, perhaps far away, or what has gone on before, perhaps long ago, often involving the suffering of others. It's just that the emphasis is a little different. If we imagine a continuum between the personal and the political, between the quotidian and the historically or socially significant, along which nothing is either one or the other, but always both to different degrees, Collins and Ross are both on it. They're just writing from different places on that continuum, and sometimes they're not that far apart. We're lucky to have them both with us tonight. Please welcome Anna Ross and Martha Collins.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Martha and I just looked at each other and said, yeah, we agree. We're on the same spectrum. Okay. It's really wonderful to be at the Grolier. This place means so much to me. It was the place that when I graduated from Mount Holyoke College in 1997, I said to my then mentor, Mary Jo Salter, but where am I going to find poets when I go to Boston? And she said, she thought for a minute. She said, oh, well, just go to the Grolier. You'll be fine. And I did, I think I showed up here like day 2 and yeah, here I am a lot of years later. And I also read from my first book here. I launched my first book here. So it's, yeah, to read among these photographs. Actually, I shouldn't look at the photographs because that's a little intimidating. But I'm really pleased to be here and so pleased to be reading with Martha, whose work I admire enormously, and to be introduced by Jeff, who has been such a wonderful support for this book in particular. I'm going to start with the first poem in the book. It's called House. I come from there with lavender growing small against the bricks. I come from there with a little white jug and a tea towel on the tray. I come from there with a worn stair rug and a wooden banister, leading up 2 floors past bedroom doors to a room at the very top, with a window looking down to a square of grass and a garden wall, where roses grow with tangled canes rooting between the cracks. I come from where I once was told someone attached a lock on her bedroom door and didn't say why or who she feared might open it through all the years she stayed in the house with lavender grown small against the bricks and the roses rooting through the wall and the tea towel on the tray and the little white jug and worn stair rug she descended the day she went away. I come from there. I feel like I should give thanks also to Joan Kane, who's here in the front, because I wrote that poem and I thought, I don't know if I want this in my book. And she said, it should be in your book and it should be the first poem. Self-portrait as girl. You were always looking for balloons, or not balloons themselves, but the feeling that they might appear at any moment. You looked for roads where there should not be roads, checking them off inside yourself. In the absence of dogs, you were brave about dogs. You felt you should love horses, but preferred trees, the way they moved without leaving. Once you twisted an apple stem to learn the initials of the man you would marry. Once you held your breath long enough to swim the pool's width, fastest of all, each blue-green second marking the length of you, then gave your apple prize away. Welcome, come in, come in.
Hi, Anna.
Hi. Hi, Kevin.
MBTA.
All good. Okay. So as Jeff said, there are a lot of poems about mothering and what that sort of brings up in the self in this book, and how often when one is in the parenting, you start sort of going through your own childhood again alongside your kids as they're getting through those ages. So this is a poem from early in my daughter's life. It's called All Hallows. The year that she was 3, my daughter was a fox for Halloween. Orange felt hood with ears, a tail stitched to her back, and painted on whiskers. The only girl in the preschool parade not dressed as a princess. That was the same year something kept finding its way through the back wall of Granny's garden to dig up moles. Mornings we'd find the excavated holes, entrances we hadn't known existed. A fox, said Mr. Lovely, who came to cut the grass. We'd need to put down poison. But would that remove the fox or just the moles? We asked, and wouldn't it be better to find the wall's hole and fill it? My daughter cried for the fox she never saw, begged us not to kill it, but still she didn't want to go alone into the garden. I think now she was trying on fear that Halloween. Not the fox circling the henhouse kind, but the unseen thing that leaves a gash, exposing mud and plunder beneath the grass you thought you knew. In the picture we took, I hold her and her baby brother on my lap. He stares at her strange ears and painted face, amazed. She bares her teeth and locks the camera in her gaze. So that's early on in my daughter's life. And then, of course, I had a really wise hairdresser once who said, little kids, little problems, big kids, bigger problems. My kids are now both bigger than me. So this poem sort of takes the fear a step further. And it also, I hope, captures an experience of parenthood for me, which is that of being constantly interrupted and intruded upon as you're trying to sort of go about your day, like get up, get dressed, get out the door to work, go home, dinner, kids where they need to go. And as you're going through this, people are constantly asking you questions, losing things, needing help, and, the news is on, you're just getting interrupted all the time, and you're trying to keep going. So this poem incorporates some found text, as Jeff said in his introduction, from Christine Blasey Ford's testimony at Brett Kavanaugh's Senate confirmation hearing. It's called Fugue. Can you tell us what you don't forget? The senator's voice repeats from the radio. It's rush hour, Boston, I-93, driving home from dance class with my daughter in the back seat, her 12-year-old legs stretched long in pink body wrappers brand spandex as she wonders aloud what we're going to eat for dinner. Air brakes wheeze, then release beside us as the bus muscles past. And should I change the station as the senator's voice repeats, can you tell us what you don't forget? Above the traffic, rush hour, Boston, I-93, my daughter in the back seat, girl whose body I once unwrapped from mine. Is she listening now as the woman speaks? I was pushed onto the bed. His weight was heavy. I shake my head. Boston, rush hour, I-93, as if I could swerve by what edges up in me. He put his hand over my mouth. It was hard for me to breathe. Boston, rush hour, I-93, but I'm cruising a suburban street of dandelion lawns, legs the same age as my daughter, who jams her knees against my seat when I hit the brakes as one last car squeezes in ahead of me. Can you tell us, Boston, rush hour, I-93 is fixed to a grid of red. What you don't forget? Taillights that bleed their after images. Can you, against gray sky, I'm tired, forget? Picturing my bed back home. What you don't? Quilt pulled tight against the sheets. Can you don't forget? Or is it that other bed? What you? And what year was it? Forget, don't. What day? Don't. Can you forget? How? Tell us. Don't. Tell what? Did he? What? Can you forget? Don't tell us. Touch me? I was wearing a one-piece bathing suit. I believed he was going to rape me. Boston, rush hour, I-93, a taillight flickers, horns begin to beep. How many times will I repeat this drive? Mom, when are we going to move? Her voice reaches toward me and I ease my weight up off the brake, considering the question. The miles, like bodies, fall between us and what I don't forget. In Boston, rush hour, I-93, driving home from dance class with my daughter in the back seat. From the frying pan into the fire here. So we're approaching a brutal anniversary next week. It's the 10th anniversary of the Sandy Hook massacre. And I grew up in suburban Connecticut. And I actually knew in high school Jimmy Green, who's one of the parents who lost his beautiful daughter, Anna, in that horrific day. And, you know, in the 10 years that have gone since then, parents, children, anybody who's involved with schools in this country have had to live an increasingly sort of life of double consciousness of, having to continue to send their kids to school and, believe in that, while also having this horrifying knowledge, in the back of their minds of what could happen and what continues to happen, because our country just hasn't grappled with it yet. So this next poem, I just couldn't write about Sandy Hook for a couple of years. My daughter at the time was in kindergarten, and my son wasn't, he was in preschool. It was too terrifying. But then I found, as I was working towards this book, that this was a poem that I had to write, that, it was by far the most difficult, but also the one that I couldn't finish the book without. So this is called Self-Portrait with Refrain. Every day, your children go to school. It is beautiful school, red brick upon a hill with windows that face out to sea. Your son's classroom on the bottom floor, your daughter's on the second. From her square table, she can see the harbor islands humped like animals asleep within the bay, the train line running along shore. Every day you take that train to work. Whatever you're doing as you ride, talking, reading, scanning your phone for news, you look up as the school comes into view. You look up to your son on the bottom floor, your daughter on the second. Every day your children go to school. Every day, passing below, you look up and think of the heavy steel front door that clicks when it locks behind their backs each morning as they go into the school. You think of other doors. One opens on the basketball court, two more on the asphalt lot behind the school where parents collect in the afternoon. One opens to your son's class on the bottom floor. Every day your children go to school, and every day you think of the doors. You think of the boy or man who holds something in his hand as he tries the locked front door. You think of him turning, careful, the object pressed to his chest, and walking to the basketball court door. Why do you think of him? Mid-morning, and the sun finds his white hands, finds the faded orange rim of the hoop, finds the muzzle's matte black curve as he moves to check the locked back doors one by one. It is a lovely day, this day when your children go to school. Spring with a slight breeze from the sea. Why not leave the door open to it? Your son's teacher thinks, so the breeze can reach the children on their mats at rest time. I never sleep at rest time, your son declares. And so, lying awake on his robot sheets, he sees the man enter the room, sees the thing in his hands almost familiar, like the one great-grandma sent at Christmas, but not red and blue, and what comes out is not rubber balls. Why think of this? Why wonder if your daughter, on the second floor of the beautiful school with windows that look out to sea, recognizes gunfire in the noise 2 floors below? Does she hear? No more fighting over who got the bigger bowl. All the world of ice cream, now hers alone. The known night tides of breath and shift erased from the bottom bunk. Every day your children go to school, the same school high upon the hill. Every day you take the train, passing too far away to hear if there is silence in the room on the second floor. The drill practiced so often. Lock the door, sit on the rug, pretend you aren't there. From each window, the harbor islands flicker a hide and seek of wave and heat. But why think of this? Every day, the children waiting and you too far away to hear. The shuddering train that draws you on like sand, a wave pulls back to sea. You look up from your book in time to see the open door, the sirens gathering. Every day, your children go to school. Every day, you pass below, too far away to hear, and look up. Who is that standing in the doorway? Why must you think of this? the train picking up speed now, soon entering the tunnel where you'll lose sight of the beautiful school, red brick upon a hill with windows that face out to sea, where every day your children go to school. So there's another epidemic of gun violence in this country, which is less advertised, but takes more lives. And this poem I wrote for my good friend Elizabeth Cardozo and in memory of her son, Jonathan. She threw herself upon the coffin as it moved down the nave on silent wheeled hydraulics, so that the pallbearers, tall boys like him, did not bear, but steered it like an awkward boat without a prow, like nothing but a coffin, really, raised on a cart to glide eye level past the pews. And when it passed, she threw herself upon it, first her hands, then lowering her forearms down against the varnished metal finish, she pushed until her torso lay along the curving lid, across the place where his might lie below it, then lay her head above his head that years before was lidded by her skin. Boy head she carried, covered, washed and woke and rubbed and combed and chased to bed and warned and kissed, as she does now, the spot she's thrown herself upon the coffin of the one the papers labeled man, as in a man was shot and killed Tuesday, though he was only weeks past 21. Not son, not name, not love, but man, as though the bullet made him whole and finished him. But not for her, who lay now on the coffin, unfinished and undone, as if she could undo the night, the car, the friend who wouldn't speak, the shots the neighbors thought were fireworks, the evidence markers visible on the street. All of it she threw herself upon, and also on the coffin, holding the body of her son, as we all watched and could not move or speak, as if the air we would have used to do those things was gone. I'll read maybe two more. Sound good? This one is called Studies Show. Often in my biography, it says that I raise chickens in my backyard, which I do. So I feel like I should include a poem with them. Studies Show. Afternoons, the hens scratch dust baths in the loose dirt near the dogwood tree. Shallow ovals they deflate into, heads slumped to one side, as if some large animal had moved through, puncturing them all. Then a flutter of wing showers fine brown powder, and the backyard fills with resurrection, a surprise every time. Humans, studies show, are terrible at calculating risk, unable to resist appearances, the hens felled by plague, not preening. Or do we need to believe the calm morning sea immune to storm? Last week, over 1,000 drowned crossing from one country to another, a passage they thought safe. But safety is a rubber boat on a beach when all that's behind you drones and collapses. 1,000 gone from breakfast tables, beds, no letters back. But studies show large numbers are difficult for humans to conceive. We need the particular toddler collapsed on shore. It's May. I wear a shirt almost as pink as the dogwood's blossoms. Same foolish pink as the one I wore the day my waters broke and I became my daughter's failing boat. How many years since then, and still I count the hens each morning when I go out to feed them, necks stretched like the prows of miniature Phoenician ships as they plow toward me, all beak and risk, no calculation. A little note about that poem. When I was writing it, I was researching Phoenician ships, and apparently the Mediterranean Sea is like completely covered with them. And there's so many of them that, you know, they don't even bother trying to excavate them anymore. They're just like a dime a dozen on the seafloor. So this kind of migration has been going on a long time. Okay, I'm going to end with another self-portrait. Where is it? Somewhere back here. Okay, there we go. This is perhaps an inevitable self-portrait that I had to write. It's called Self-Portrait with Washing Machine. In those days, children slept all over us, and we were fast and best, but didn't know it, and sticky and milk sour, and they were perfect pink mouths of unknowing, each breath filling theirs with ours. The children slept, and we were happy. And when we woke, we learned about choices we'd been making when we thought we were putting on our good shoes, the ones our mothers gave us, or missing the last bus back, or wondering if we really liked cilantro after all, its sweet rot smell, or letting a boy show us mountains from the window of a plane. But no, there were choices, and here were new small bodies to prove it. So we slept and woke to stand facing the washing machine, and chose warm, chose cold, chose permanent press with medium spin, express wash, normal, casual. We spun the dial and rinsed where it landed, and we were happy, and then we slept. And when we woke, we saw figures walking through the trees in the park across the street. They stopped, their bodies momentary trunks, and then kept moving, and we were happy. And on the parent and child parking signs at the grocery store, we were a tall triangle with a circle head bending down to a short square with a circle head looking up. And we slept, and we were happy. And the children woke to tell us a new age had come into their bodies, that they could feel it beating. And we were happy, and we slept. And the children woke, and we tried to explain the difference between country, was there a wall over the mountains, and city, and here, each a shape falling smaller inside another. And we slept, and the children woke, and we reminded ourselves to wash the strawberries in vinegar so they wouldn't spoil, and pack the lunches, choosing the fruit piece by piece into plastic snap lid boxes, and hang the clothes out to dry. And we were happy, and we slept, and the thing that was happy slept too. Thank you. Here comes Martha Collins.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, for the wonderful reading. Thank you, Jeffrey, for the great introduction. That's terrific. Phew, that was standing. Thank you, Grolier. I think the last time I read here, I might have read with Jeffrey, except for, anyway, recently, fairly recently. So, you know, this book is called Casualty Reports. There are a number of different kinds of casualties referenced in the book. Some of them are personal, and I'll begin with a couple of those. Again later. The person you are trying is not accepting, is not at this time. Please again. The person you are trying is not in service. Please check that you have. This is your call. Your person is not accepting. Your person is this number. You have not correctly. Your person is a recording. Again later, at this time, not accepting. This next poem is for in memory of my Italian friend Maria Grazia Marzot, and the title is translated in the first line. L'ultimo viaggio. This will be your last trip, the friends of my friends say when I arrive in the small city near the town, near the house where our friend lives and is now, I am told, dying. But for 6 days, I almost forget while my friend and I read Rilke together, recalling the years, so many, and it is as if now we're then, and then always. On the train back to Rome, it is dark, and then it is not so dark, but there's mist in the valley and clouds over it, white against this darkness, through which bare trees begin to appear. And some grass as we are, appears to green the earth as we are, from which a flock of birds, white are they doves, rises, then settles. A flock of white sheep appears, then more birds, more white into white mist, and then between some distant hills, the sudden fire of the sun. And I think of sitting beside the fire in the house of my friend, and I take it in. I think of Rilke. I think of my friend and her two good friends. I think of her last journey, soon to come, ultimo, into that fire, the dark, the mist, the white night. And there's a section in here about war and its consequences, and I'll read a couple of those. To leave, no. To disappear into the walls, the earth, to fall from the sky, to disappear into the sea, to disappear into the red glare of the sun, the flames, the hurt, the burned, the fire in their eyes, to disappear into the whites of their eyes, the broad white stripes, the blood red stripes lashed into flesh, to reappear as bright stars in our sky, constellations of blazing pain, then to fall out of our history into, to disappear into this, to appear to disappear into the page. This next poem was written some time ago for Gaza, and I read it now with both Gaza and Ukraine in mind. For Gaza. For the woman who cooks on a fire of sticks and boards beside her shell of a house, her bag of clothes in a tree. For physician Ani al-Jarrou, his wife cut in half, his year-old son turned to pieces. For the 30 dead Samuni family members dug out of the rubble, for the living, including children who clutched dead mothers. For the schools and mosques and homes destroyed by bombs, for the graves disturbed by tanks. For the more than 1,300 dead, including those who walked from their homes as directed with white flags. For those going home to water their trees, lemon and almond and olive, and for those trees. And now coal. In Illinois. My father's father had a share in the Enterprise mine, the Enterprise Coal and Coke Company, 1871. He was a shareholder, being a coal digger, kept a log of entries, shafts and air shafts, rooms by number and number of feet, died 1881. My father's father went down to a river town to work, came back to the mining town where his father went down in the Paradise mine, a miner and later a mine examiner, tested the air, the face, and the roof. Sundays and holidays too, walked 3 miles out and back when there was no train. My father, whose mother kept him out of the mines, kept his father's oil lamp, kept his father's carbide and safety lamps, kept a box of wicks, picks, globes, kept his father's 50-year union pin, his first aid pin, his flashlight, safe for use, kept manuals, papers. This lamp was given, all labeled, this pin was given, kept it all. It was his legacy, labeled, dated 1965, and signed and kept for me. Movie. When I was 10, they took me into a coal mine. I gave a report to our class that had seen How Green Was My Valley, a movie set in Wales. The miners had lamps like my grandfather's lamps, and I never forgot the whistle, explosion, the father trapped and killed, but I had forgotten the wage cuts, the strike, the lost jobs, the emigration to countries like our own. Du Quoin. In my family's town, which was also Ruby Goodman's town, there were accidents, there were explosions, there were strikes. But although the miners armed themselves at least once against rumored strikebreakers, the union, which met in houses before it joined the UMWA, succeeded without violence and became one of the largest locals with over 1,000 members, including Ruby's Black father, for a time the union president. You have to join the union, he said. Everyone does. Every man has the same voice, white, black, gray, no big eyes, no little U's. In this next poem, excuse me, I am singing in a choir and I made the mistake of practicing. I'm losing my voice. So my apologies for a few cracks. At least you don't have to hear me sing. The next poem takes its title from a 1949 book by Margaret Wise Brown, whom I'm sure some of you know as the author of Goodnight Moon. Two little miners. Two little miners standing on the little golden book cover. One white and one black. They smile at each other. Like the Integrated Miners Union. Oh, but look inside. They wake up clean as snow, but by night they've turned black. Black as soot, night a crow. Black as black, coal black. Back home, they live alone, but someone's fixed their supper. Two little miners, black as night. Scrub in your tub until you're white. I'll return to coal in a minute, but first I want to read a poem that I believe Jeffrey quoted from. Jake Adam York, the late Jake Adam York, grew up in Alabama, a white man, and determined that he was going to visit all of the sites where victims of the civil rights movement and era had been killed and write a poem about each one. He unfortunately died at the age of 39, and the also late John Tribble invited all American poets to continue this project. So I visited Philadelphia, Mississippi, and indeed wrote this poem. Philadelphia was the place where the three civil rights workers, Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman, were held in jail before they were released and killed. Rehearsal, Philadelphia, Mississippi, Luther Jackson, 1932 to 1959. A block from the county courthouse with the Confederate soldier memorial, past the jail where the civil rights workers were held while the Klan assembled in '64. Down Bird to Oak to Water to Pine, past magnolias into sweet gum catalpas, into this dead-end cave of trees where he parked one night with the girl and passed out, and Officer Rainey found them and ordered him out of the car and pushed him out of sight of the girl, who heard 2 shots and heard Rainey say, "Come down, I think I have killed a..." And then the coroner's jury said justifiable homicide, and Medgar Evers requested an investigation, but the Justice Department said no violation. And 5 years later, they accused Rainey and 20 others of conspiring to kill the civil rights workers. But 3 years later, Rainey himself was acquitted. And 50 years later, the FBI reopened the Jackson case, but found no police, no county records, just newspaper files and relative stories. And anyway, Rainey was dead. Of course, I couldn't have been that girl. But if I'd been the white girl I was and lived here and read the papers, would I have questioned justifiable? And if I'd been here 5 years later and read about the civil rights workers, and decades later when Michael, Eric, Tamir, Philando, and all the others, could I? Can I imagine myself in that car at the end of this dead-end street where a man was ordered out of the car and the girl who was with him, who was not me, cried, "You have killed him for nothing." And now I'll return to coal, going all the way back to its prehistoric origins. Grave. It is all over the earth, under earth, a graveyard. Tree ferns, trees, roots, bark, seeds, ancient life that emerged from the sea, forests flooded to swamps and bogs, transformed to peat, transformed again, sunk, covered with layers of earth, with strange amphibian, snake, and later dinosaur bones. Layers and layers, and under it all for hundreds of millions of years, our ancestors resting under earth, overburdened, we say, until we found them. And the revolution we call the coal to power steam engines, to pump water and lift coal, to sell or used to power steam. Coal to coke for furnaces, to smelt iron to make tools, and furnaces to smelt for rails. Trains to transport coal to power steam engines, to power trains, and boats to transport coal. Harnessed the power of, raised to the power of power. This next poem also takes its title from a children's book, or rather from a series of children's books. The machine that it describes lives in Germany. And the poem utilizes the website of the machine as well as the children's book. Now that's big. Then they made the largest machine, the heaviest in the world. It's as long as 2.5 football fields. It weighs 13,000 tons, has 18 buckets to excavate the overburden that covers the coal. It could fill 10,000 dump trucks per day, as much as 40,000 workers could. It's continuous, never stops. It's still uncovering 40 million tons each year to power electric stations that power much of its country, including itself. It won't stop till 2050, when all the coal in the mine where it works will be exhausted. Whose lungs were lost to coal dust, black coal to black lung, now rock dust to lungs. Whose jobs were lost to strip mines, to mining machines, to natural gas, or paid less because. Who sold mineral rights to land when farming replaced jobs, whose farms subsided, were lost. Two more. Burning. The mercury, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides from burning coal that fill our air and fall upon us as acid rain. The selenium, arsenic, lead from coal ash stored in coal ash ponds that leak and spill and pollute our waters. But most of all, the carbon dioxide released by burning that captures heat, that warms our air and melts our glaciers, lifts our seas and warms them, dries our land and fuels fires, strengthens rainfalls and hurricanes that swell our waters and generate floods, all of which threaten our coasts and cities, our islands and whole nations, consume our animals, plants, insects, and fish, whole species, including most likely our own, unless. And the last poem in this sequence, and the last poem I'll read. Blessing. Where we dug up the graves of Black slaves who mined the first coal in Illinois. Where we desecrated the graves of indigenous people that covered coal in the Southwest. Where we dug up animals, plants in their graves and burned them as oil and gas and coal. There and throughout our earth, let us grieve for the graves we robbed, and then let us bless the graves of the dead that remain, and over them for the living, the wind, the sun. Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause for the poet.
Why not?
Yeah, let's do a Q&A.
Okay, all right.
You guys want to stand there or you want chairs?
I'm okay to stand, yeah.
I think we should bring Jeffrey up here. He's part of this. And a great part too.
Yeah.
Anybody? Was Jeffrey right?
I have a question for you, which is, how do you go about these research-driven poems? I've taught for book in my documentary poetry class, of course. So
And I've been to your documentary.
right,
class.
exactly. But I, you know, every time you publish a new book, there's a new thread of research, and they all seem to like then go back to you. So I'm just wondering, how do you do that?
Yeah, I didn't start like that. I used to write poems like everybody else. This all started when I discovered that my father had witnessed a lynching, and I could not leave that alone. And I had seen this exhibit of lynching postcards, which a lot of people saw, and I've had people say, oh, I thought about writing about that, but I couldn't. And the truth is, I couldn't have either if I hadn't had the connection of my father, who had seen that lynching when he was 5 years old, I discovered. And every time I've embarked on a new thing, I always think I'm done with these things. There's always family in it. My next book was about race and it was more personal. The next researchy book was, it started with the fact that my grandparents had gone to the World's Fair in 1904. And this one, as you can see, starts with my grandfather and great-grandfather. And for me, I mean, this is why I think Jeffrey's introduction was so terrific, because for me, there's really no research, there's no topic, there's no subject that I can approach if I'm not in it. Even if I'm not directly in it, even if I'm not saying I have to ground myself or I can't do it at all. And I was thinking we're sort of yin and yang this way, you know, that your poems just so often these poems that should be so tenderly about parenting have what is not. And I was particularly, as I say, I was just incredibly moved by Fugue. It's just a wonderful poem.
Thank you.
But doing research is, you know, it's that's the main thing I would say about it. The other thing that I've learned is that I can't do research and then write. That's too much like doing term papers for English 101. Like, because I'm writing all the time. And I often don't know a lot when I'm writing, and the not knowing is as important as the finding out.
That's interesting. Yeah.
We have a question in the chat
Yeah.
From Marilyn Johnson that says, I wonder what happened to the objects from the mine that Martha inherited.
They are in my study.
Wow.
And I guess I can't extend this all the way to the Zoom, but people are going to come over to my place after. And if you would like to do that,
You can see the objects.
you can see the objects, and I have directions here. It's about 15, 20 minutes away walking. And it's interesting, when I started doing this, I had forgotten that my father had left all of this stuff, and everything is labeled. Really is, you know, this pin was given and he signs all this stuff. And it's really made me appreciate in this difficult time, when of course the coal miners are feeling dissed by all of us and by climate change and all of that. And it really makes me understand the legacy that they feel. You know, this union stuff is particularly strong. And you hear that from people these days in Kentucky, for example. And it's very complex. And I think that's the other thing. And this is what I appreciate about your poems too. Without that emotional complexity, I'm not interested in writing about so-called issues.
Yeah, it becomes didactic.
Yep.
Yeah. Diana?
You both used repetition, and I really enjoyed it. It was almost like listening to music. And I don't know you as well as I know Anna, but you know, Anna is very musical, and so it reminded me of that kind of how you have that through line in music, and you are able to go from there. And I wondered if that's how either of you thought about it.
Yeah. So I'm also in a choir, but I didn't rehearse today. I'm bad. I didn't practice. So I kept my voice. Yeah. So I didn't used to trust repetition in my work. And also I didn't trust, I do have a background in music. I studied voice pretty seriously in college and after. And I distrusted my impulse towards musicality and language because I thought I was just making pretty noises and I wasn't getting at the real stuff to write about. And so there's a lot less of it in my first book. And I found that when I was writing this book, well, first of all, I read a lot of people that shook me out of that. Nikki Finney's book, Head Off and Split, was sort of formative for me that way. But I also found that when I was, I'm interested to hear if Martha feels the same way. When I'm working through a subject that I'm interrogating and also that is difficult, I need to sort of use that engine of repetition to get at it. And, some of the work in this book is hard, it's grappling with difficult things. And so I also need the music to sort of lift it a little bit, like I need to have some nice sounds in order to convey, the emotion of the piece. It's not as like clinical as that sounds when I'm actually writing it, but I just sort of, for instance, when I was writing Fugue, it took a long time to put that poem together. Joan helped again, as did others. And I found that E sound just kept coming back. And so then I thought, okay, I'm just going to make sure that I have a long E in every 2 or 3 lines. There's going to be that sound, because that kind of propelled me through that. With Self-Portrait with Refrain, that poem was like physically difficult for me to write. And I just had to, every time I stopped, I had to just go back and write every day your children go to school. And then I could move forward again. But yeah, I think that often we're taught, and this maybe goes back to writing, when we're very young and we're writing essays and things, we're taught that like, if you repeat, you're being boring. But then I also teach a song and poetry class at Emerson, and, you start to realize, well, no, actually we learn through repetition. Like repetition is such a tool for us that it feels foolish to not bring that out in the work. So
Yeah, I guess when I started writing poetry, I fell in love with sound. And so I didn't have to add it. It was something that was so there. In fact, sometimes I've found in teaching that my students, if we were confronting a poem that we'd never seen before in a workshop, they would know what it was about before I would, because I'd be listening to the music.
mm-hmm.
And that's what I've always done. And sometimes to the point of that's what carries me. And the repetition for me, of course, is a part of that. It's part of music. I think for me, rather than it being a sort of comfort place, it's kind of the opposite. When I started writing these difficult poems, I often found myself stuck with a phrase and I couldn't go on. And so it kept coming back. So in some ways, it's even though I'm still interested in the music, it's a kind of point of trouble for me often.
Interesting.
Well, we're the same but different again.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Okay.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you again, Grolier, and definitely. If you want to see some coal lamps.
I want to see the poems.
Hi, everybody. If you could help move the chairs up against the back wall, I'd be grateful. We have some folks for sale on the colorful design.
Oh, should we sit here to sign books?
I don't.
Okay, I thought I was the only one.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we should.